I'm Steve Harvey, the Executive Director of the Transcendental Politics Foundation. So far in the 3 videos I've made discussing what Transcendental Politics is, I've spoken at a very high level of generality. And one obvious objection might be, well, that sounds great in principle, but what is the point of saying we should be reasonable people of goodwill and defining reason and defining goodwill when that's just a given and people are doing it in a variety of specific ways? How does it define a new movement or something that makes a positive and meaningful contribution to existing movements? And the answer to that is that there is some specificity we could add into this. For instance, we can make a distinction between positional politics and principled politics, which we can also call a distinction between ideological politics and transcendent politics. The terms positional and principled come from Roger Fisher and William Ury, who wrote a book called Getting to Yes, which was a book on a new approach to bargaining theory. So when people get together to bargain, they traditionally assume positions. You want to buy a used car, you offer a price, the seller offers a counter, you have positions, you slowly whittle your way down toward the middle, splitting the difference. That is one approach, positional bargaining. Another approach is called principled bargaining, in which you agree that you both can benefit from an optimal agreement, that there are objective criteria you can use to help define what that optimal agreement would be, and that if you work together instead of just oppositionally, without assuming initial positions, but instead offering ideas, brainstorming, putting it on the plate, comparing it, applying criteria to it, you could actually arrive at more optimal outcomes more often if both parties are willing to engage in this, a less oppositional, more cooperative approach to arriving at optimal agreements. And this is actually a defining feature of transcendental politics. We're moving away from the traditional notion of politics as engaging in opposing ideological positions and toward a more transcendent, more principled approach to politics, which is those who are willing, those who are so inclined, to put aside their ideological dogmas and put aside their ideological tribal identities and say, look, let's forget about that. Let's agree that there are objective criteria that can be used, that there are reasonable analyses that we can mobilize, and that we have a shared objective of serving all stakeholders' interests to the greatest possible extent in a balanced, fair, and robust and sustainable way. And we can agree on these things. Reasonable people of goodwill can agree on these things. And then to the extent possible, we can work together to make that happen. Now, clearly, not everybody's going to sign on to that. So transcendental politics does not instantly come upon the stage, encompassing all the population and everything is wonderful. We made this huge paradigm shift in which we're actually governing ourselves as well as we can because we're reasonable people of goodwill instead of ideological tribes. No, that doesn't happen instantly, but it's a movement. And the more people we can attract to that movement, modeling it, practicing it, in very disciplined ways. It requires an effort, it requires a commitment, it requires work when you interact with others to interact with them in ways which actually model and promote the transcendent approach. And the word transcendent sounds very lofty. I arrived at it a little reluctantly at first as I was naming this movement, because what is it we're actually trying to do? We're trying to transcend our ideological tribalism. We're trying to transcend our false certainties. We're trying to transcend our default psychological and behavioral modalities that don't work optimally well. We're trying to do better. We're trying to transcend those old ways, those old habits, in order to do a better job of working together in service to our shared humanity. And the more people we can attract to that, and the better we model it, and the more we demonstrate how preferable it is and how much better it works, the more steam such a movement can gain. It will never overtake the whole population. It will never become the sole defining modality of society. But like all such historical movements and all such historical progressions, we can create more or less of it. We can promote it more or less effectively. We can attract a larger or smaller portion of the population to it. We could define it more or less clearly so that it's clear and identifiable what it is we're trying to do. We can make it more of a shared identity among people who are already doing it, but don't necessarily give it a name or think of it as something that they're doing in common with others in very different fields who are doing a different aspect of it. We could create more of a sense of commonality and shared endeavor and shared mission by giving all different aspects of this shared enterprise one umbrella. All people who are trying to be diligent about how to understand the world we live in, all people who are trying to be diligent about serving our shared humanity with empathy and compassion and humility and determination, all people who are engaged in those two aspects of this one endeavor can identify with a different kind of tribe, what I call enlightened tribalism, just like enlightened self-interest, a tribe in which the purpose is to increase cooperation. The purpose is to increase the degree to which disciplined reason is applied to the mission of improving our shared humanity. That is the key. So moving now from general to specific, we can move from positional politics to principled politics, or in other words, from ideological tribal politics to transcendent, humanistic, rational, imaginative politics. And that is what transcendental politics is really all about. So in future videos, I'll continue to get into greater and greater levels of specificity, identifying different facets and dimensions of what transcendental politics actually is, so that listeners and readers and people who might be developing some interest or curiosity about this can understand that it is a real thing, that it has a real definition, and that it has a real value that we're bringing to the shared endeavor of life on Earth. Thanks for listening. I look forward to talking with you again soon.